Hello and welcome to Classic Country Backstories. I'm Colleen Gallagher. Throughout the careers of many country stars, there are musicians, backup singers, managers, booking agents, and an array of people who help to make them who they are or keep them where they are. Sometimes there are rare instances when a sideman or woman is instrumental in an entertainer's sound or persona. Today we're going to talk about one of those rare instances, of someone who helped a star create their sound and spent most of his career right beside the entertainer until the very end of his life. Today, we're going to talk about Don Rich. Nashville, Tennessee, country music capital of the world, home of the Grand Ole Opry, where singers and dreamers come seeking stardom. Join me as we learn about the lives and careers of those who built this town on Classic Country Backstories. Donald Eugene Ulrich was born on August 15, 1941 in Olympia, Washington. He was the adopted son of Bill and Ann Ulrich. He grew up in Tumwater, Washington. His parents, although a little clingy, were great. They loved Don, and his mom was known to be a little overprotective. Don's father built a small violin for his son, and he began learning to play sometime around the age of 3. He also began learning to play guitar. Don's parents entered him into several talent contests as a young boy. During high school, he began to play in the school band while also playing local venues. In September 1957, Don and his band even opened for Elvis Presley at the Tacoma Lincoln Bowl. Don formed a band called the Blue Comets with his friends, pianist Steve Martin and drummer Greg Hawkins. Don was already a good-looking and talented 16-year-old, and the girls were wild about him. Don was interested in the girls, but his mom was just a little too much for most of them. Who knows where Don Rich's talent would have taken him if he had remained a lead singer and a frontman. He was already garnering lots of attention of his own. It's likely that Don Rich would have been a name worth talking about without Buck Owens. However, without Don Rich, I'm not sure that Buck Owens would have been nearly as successful. In 1958, he was performing at a place called Steve's Restaurant in South Tacoma. At the time, Buck Owens was working on radio station KAYE. Buck saw Don performing at the restaurant and talked with him. Shortly thereafter, Don began working with Buck at local venues. Traveling with Buck gave Don a chance to get a little breathing room from his parents. The girls in other towns didn't know that Don had a helicopter mom. They paid a lot of attention to him, and Don loved that attention. Buck and Don were featured on a weekly show called Bar K Jamboree on KTNT TV, where Loretta Lynn was a guest with them on her very first television appearance. Around this time, Buck and Don were driving to California to record. Buck began singing and practicing his songs while driving. Don joined in and began singing perfect harmony with Buck. This had never happened before, and it was magic. Buck said it was as if Don could read his mind and that they'd been singing together forever. Still, Buck wasn't sure if Don could pull it off under pressure, so he does his own harmonies on the session. It wasn't long before Buck had his first major break when he recorded and released Under Your Spell Again, which made it to the number 4 position on the country music charts. Buck moved back to Bakersfield, California to continue recording for Capitol Records. He tried to convince Don to move with him, but Don decided to attend Centralia College instead, where he tutored music and wanted to earn a degree to teach music. Even though he was 18, a legal adult, he was concerned that his parents would be upset if he quit college. As much as Buck loved Don, he could not put his career on hold while Don got an education. He knew he had to strike while the iron was hot. While Don was attending school, he met back up with Marlene Schindler. He had previously met Marlene a few years prior in Morton, a town in eastern Lewis County, where she was the reigning queen of the Morton Loggers Festival. About 4 months after Buck headed to California, he received a letter from Don saying he was miserable at college. He said that people at college don't want to play music the way he wanted to play. Don asked Buck if he could move to California and go to work for him. Buck called him on the phone and told him he'd better get his ass to California so they could play music the way they both liked it. He hired Don in December of 1960 for $75 a week. He returned to Washington long enough to get Marlene. They went to Nevada and married before returning to Bakersfield and moving into Buck's house. The first Buck Owens record that Don played on was Above and Beyond. The song made it all the way to the number 3 position on the charts. Buck and Don toured the country by throwing Buck's acoustic guitar and Don's fiddle along with an old Fender Bassman amp in the back of Buck's old Ford pickup truck, playing honky-tonks all over the state of California, using musicians they could find along the way. Meanwhile, they continued to record in Bakersfield. Fellow Buckaroo Tom Brumley once said of Rich, "I don't know whether Don was ever appreciated as he should have been as a fiddle player. We'd do second fiddle on the show, and boy, tears would just come to my eyes as he played, and they would come to his eyes too. He just played with such feeling, heart, and soul." It was during this time that Don began learning all he could about Buck's guitar style. He learned to play exactly like Buck, who was a fantastic guitar player. He continued to play fiddle, but then began playing guitar with him as well, eventually taking over as Buck's guitar player, so Buck could focus on being the show's frontman. Marlene worked in support to keep Buck and Don performing. They went on to have 2 sons, Vic and Vance. In 1961, Buck released Foolin' Around, which spent 8 weeks at the number 2 spot on the Billboard chart. At this point, the songs that Buck released were primarily Texas shuffle style, with Don playing the role of the lonesome fiddler. In 1962, Buck released You're For Me, a song he had written several years earlier. The shuffle on the hi-hat moved to a tightly closed hi-hat, and the offbeat was accented by an aggressive rim shot, half-click on the snare drum. The Telecaster guitar sounds were bright and unique. The bass went from an upright to an electric. Owens called it the train sound. It is often referred to as the Bakersfield Sound. In 1964, Buck formed a band and chose Don to be his band leader. In the early years, several band members came and went, but Don was a constant member. Some other members of the band were Ken Presley, who died in a car accident while a member, Jay McDonald, Mel King, Wayne Stone, and Merle Haggard, who dubbed the band the Buckaroos, and the name stuck. In early 1963, Buck was pitched Act Naturally, written by Johnny Russell. Buck didn't initially like the song, but Don talked him into recording it, saying he thought it was a potential hit. Don kept walking around humming the song. Eventually, Buck figured if Don liked it that much, he'd better cut it. Act Naturally was recorded on February the 12th, 1963, and released on March 11th. The song entered into the charts by April 13th, and it became Buck's first number 1, holding the position 4 non-consecutive weeks. The song was covered by the Beatles in 1966 with Ringo Starr as lead vocalist. Their version also helped to boost Buck's original version and actually boosted Buck Owens' popularity and introduced his name to a broader audience. In 1989, Buck and Ringo would revisit the song, this time as a duet. The pair also made a tongue-in-cheek video. Act Naturally topped out at number 27 on the Billboard charts. Act Naturally was the first Buck Owens song that featured Don Rich on guitar. Over their previous years together, Buck taught Don to play guitar in his style, and by 1963, Don was mainly playing guitar for Buck, so he could focus on being the frontman for the show. Originally, Don played Buck's 1951 Telecaster through a Bassman amp. Buck and Don both used the Bassman at the same time. Don later played through a twin reverb amp. Owens followed up Act Naturally with another freight train-style song called Love's Gonna Live Here, which went to number 1 and remained there for 16 weeks. During the summer of 1963, bassist Kenny Pierce walked out on the Buckaroos, so Don called Doyle Holly, who was an acquaintance of his. Then Jay McDonald, who played steel guitar, left and was replaced by Tom Brumley. Next, the band released 2 more singles. The first was My Heart Skips a Beat. The second record featured Tom Brumley on one of the most well-known and loved steel guitar rides in country music history. Buck later said that the solo set the standard for steel guitar players everywhere. The song was Together Again. Both tunes were released simultaneously and both charted to the #1 position, where they switched spots several times on the charts. In January 1964, Buck and Don hired Willie Cantu, a native of Texas, who was a mere 16 years old. In July, the band recorded I Don't Care. This tune also made it to #1, featuring another twangy Don Rich lead ride. Here's what Willie Cantu said about his time with the Buckaroos and Don Rich.
Don Rich was the person that recommended me for the job. Because he had heard me the night before they performed. And the other two, the drummer before me that was there, and Jay McDonald, the steel player, they were no longer in the band. Jay, the steel player, had quit, and so Tom Brumley joined the band a month before I did. And so that's why he was at Capitol Records recording Together Again, that famous steel guitar solo that he played.
The Together Again song.
He'd only been in the band like about 3 weeks or so. We were doing a stage show, and Buck was on stage while they were setting up and everything, and supposedly Mel got it in his mind that he was tired of setting up behind Buck and Don along with the amplifiers.
Yes.
That's where the drums went. And he decided he wanted to move his drums up in front.
So he wanted to be like in a straight line.
In line with Buck and Don. And so Doyle Howley's the one that started. He says, you can't do this. And he says, well, Mel says, well, I'm not moving. And so Doyle finds Don Rich, who was actually the band.
Was he the band leader?
He was the band leader, yes. And he took care of all the little things that go on that Buck does not want to deal with.
Right.
And so he didn't want to budge. And so Don went and got Buck and told him what was happening. Buck came back, storming back, picked up the bass drum, threw it off.
Oh my word!
And everything else that was there. And I think they played the night without drums, or maybe if there was another band, maybe there was never any mention of who played drums or anyone played drums. So that was the end of Mel King.
So he was gone and they hired you to come in.
So that's what happened. Probably within a week or so, I got a call from Buck asking me to join the band.
Wow.
A week later after I arrived, we met the rest of the band. They all drove out to the ranch, and I have a couple of photos that were taken, probably by maybe Rolene or Marlene, one of the wives, of us standing right next to this Dodge motorhome. That's what we were going to travel at that time.
Wow.
You know, and we're all standing in line, one with Buck and one without Buck, and those pictures are easy to find.
I was going to say, do you have those like?
I know I have one anyway. So our first job was up in Redding, California, quite a few hours away. So it was a different experience getting into the bus, and these guys all knew each other. So I'm kind of like the outcast.
And you were probably quite a bit younger than any of the rest of
them. Don was 25. Okay. He was the one closer to my age.
Yes.
Buck was like around 35, 36. Tom was in his early 30s. Doyle was a couple of 2-3 years older than Don. So
it was a pretty good age span difference.
So I must say that throughout my whole time with the band, they all treated me as an equal.
That's fantastic.
Buck always treated me just like one of the guys. He didn't treat me like I was his second son or anything like that. I was in the band. I was a professional like the rest of the guys. I did my job as well. And so there was no need for him I never was a problem. I didn't drink, I didn't smoke. So we go on the first trip, and this I have to tell you, I'm sitting there for hours listening to all this manly talk. Something I had no experience in, you know. Kind of like locker room talk, you know. And I'm thinking, how long am I going to have to listen to this? When are we going to get there? But so I decided, okay, I'll just go to the back and take a nap. That's what I did. So, okay, we arrive and unload and everything. And Don, as it turned out, we would pair off in rooms, okay, to each room. And Buck, of course, by himself. And so I was rooming with Don. And so I remember saying to Don, when we never rehearsed. And he said, well, we don't need to. You know? And I said, well, okay. And so, and I should have put 2 and 2 together. There was nothing to rehearse because all I had to play is the same beat in different tempos for all the songs, you know.
By the time that you came with him, I know when Buck had hired Don, it was originally as a fiddle player for the most part.
Yes.
And then as time went on, Buck
Don
played.
was 17 too when he first joined Buck, so.
Wow. So then he kind of worked Don into playing guitar, his kind of style of guitar, correct? Is that
yes.
my understanding?
Without Buck, there wouldn't have been any Don Rich.
He would have remained a fiddle player.
Because,
probably.
yes, he started as a fiddle player and then started learning to play the guitar. And Buck was already like playing sessions for Capitol Records. That's how he started before he became a singer on record.
As a guitar player?
Yeah, as a guitar player. He was a session player. Buck was he was a stylist.
Sure.
Okay? And sound-wise and concept-wise, you know, the things that he played, no one else was, at that time, was doing on a Fender Telecaster. He practically invented that sound, you know, himself. No one else. Not Don. Don absorbed that. He learned what Buck knew and from other sources, but without Buck, you know.
And isn't it, it's funny because it's kind of like a mix because at the same time, I mean, I know Buck would have been successful anyway, but for a lot of years, everybody was so used to seeing Buck and Don
Well, because
together.
you see, Don was perfect in terms of singing harmony.
Yes.
You know, he had the ability and the sound to blend in well with Buck, because originally Buck did all his harmonies on the early records.
His own harmonies on his records.
So Don started doing harmonies, and then eventually, and I think it happened more when I was in the band, that Buck would let Don take the solos. Eventually, by the end of that year, I think Buck was playing just rhythm, and maybe once in a while, when we were still doing dances in clubs. So doing like four sets, you know, 4-hour sets.
You were doing 4-hour sets at that point.
Yeah, and so therefore, Buck would stay up on stage, and maybe he would do most of the lead work, and then once he would take off the last set, and let Don just take over the band, and Don would play lead the whole set. You know. But eventually that changed because we started doing less clubs and more shows, you know, auditoriums and that type of stuff.
So how long were your shows when you started? Were they like 90? Were they like a 90-minute?
They were an hour, yeah. And everything as years passed and more hits he accumulated, it became like medleys of his hits. So he could only do like maybe half a song, and I hated that because, you know, it just made less playing time. My first recording session, I joined the band in the first week of February. My first recording session was like in May. Okay. And the songs that we played were actually Crying Time, and which was a hit, and I Don't Care.
Oh wow.
Okay?
Yeah.
One was a slow song that Ray Charles covered and made Buck a lot of money. And then I Don't Care. The thing about I Don't Care that's special, it's the first song that Buck ever recorded that wasn't a shuffle.
That's the first one.
I don't care. Okay,
Yeah.
eighth notes.
Yeah.
Rock and roll.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
He didn't ask for a rock and roll beat, but I played straight eighth notes and probably a cross stick.
Yeah.
And if you listen to it, I haven't heard it in ages, but I think Don plays the intro as a shuffle. Da-da-do-do-dum, da-da-do-dum, you know,
Yes.
and it's da-da-da. So I'm thinking that he changed his phrasing once we started playing. They just kept it, you know.
That's great.
I'm pretty sure that that's the way it starts.
I
But
didn't-
originally that's the way Don played it, until he realized that it was a different type of feel and not a straight up eighth note
Yeah.
feel, you know. And so that was the first session.
In 1965, Buck Owens and the Buckaroos recorded the hits Tiger by the Tail, Before You Go, co-written by Don Rich, Only You Can Break My Heart, and Buckaroo, which was the only instrumental to ever go #1 on the country charts. By this point, musical instrument manufacturers noticed popularity of Buck Owens and the Buckaroos. The Fender Company had previously given Buck a gold sparkle Telecaster. Now they gave Buck a Fender acoustic, Don a champagne sparkle Telecaster, and Doyle Holly a champagne sparkle jazz bass. The finish on Don and Doyle's guitars were rough because it contained crushed glass. Willie Cantu received a sparkle drum kit from the Rogers Drum Company, and Tom Brumley received an 11-string pedal steel from ZB Guitars. This allowed Brumley to cover Don's licks during the song's choruses, leaving Rich free to harmonize with Buck. Fender had a deal with most of their artists that they would trade in their guitars every few years for a new one. Owens refused to give his guitars back, so Fender stopped endorsing the Buckaroos. Gibson realized this and started endorsing the band in the early 70s. Don Rich received a Gibson ES 335 and a Les Paul Professional model. At some point, Don and Buck went back to playing their red, white, and blue Telecasters. In January of 1966, Waitin' in Your Welfare Line was released, and once again, Buck Owens had another #1. On March 15th that year, Buck and the Buckaroos began taping a half-hour television show called The Buck Owens Ranch Show. The show was filmed and distributed for several years and only ceased because it became a conflict with Buck's future show, Hee Haw. In March of 1966, the Buckaroos performed at New York's Carnegie Hall. The show was recorded live and has often been credited as being one of the best live country music recordings of all time. Owens later said the band did not have to go back and fix any mistakes because the band was so tight there weren't any. Buck and Rich continued to release more #1s in 1966 with Think of Me, written by Don Rich and Estella Olson, and Open Up Your Heart. In late 1966, Doyle Holly left the Buckaroos for a 9-month period and was replaced by Wayne Wilson. The band scored 3 more #1 hits in 1967. Where Does the Good Times Go?, Sam's Place, and Your Tender Lovin' Care. They also recorded another live album, this one in Japan, which was very successful. In 1968, Buck Owens and Don Rich began experimenting with new sounds different from the freight train sound, but success continued for the Buckaroos. How Long Will My Baby Be Gone went to #1, and the band recorded a live album at the White House, though it wasn't released until 1972. Buck signed to Hee Haw in 1968. The Buckaroos served as the house band, and Don Rich was hired as the musical director. The show began airing in 1969 on CBS. The same year, Buck went to #1 with Who's Gonna Mow Your Grass and Tall Dark Stranger. Don added an experimental fuzz sound to his guitar on Tall Dark Stranger. Another live album in London was also recorded. Now we know that no one is perfect, not even Don Rich. It has been reported many times from many different sources that Don had a lead foot. Tom Brumley once said Buck had a governor put on the bus. The reason, when Don drove, he would put his foot to the floor on the highway. The device kept the speed limit from topping 82 miles an hour. Don loved riding motorcycles. One of his bikes was a Harley-Davidson Sportster with the front wheel raked way out like the American chopper in the movie Easy Rider. Buck was always concerned about Don riding his motorcycle. Buck said he would cut out newspaper clippings of motorcycle fatalities and hang them on the bulletin board in the studio. Buck Owens, Don Rich, and the Buckaroos continued to record, tour, and film Hee Haw. The lineup of Buckaroos changed, but Don remained with Buck. Owens and Rich would reach #1 on the Billboard charts one last time with Made in Japan, released in 1972. Buck was beginning to change in his music back to the style of their earlier days when tragedy struck. Don Rich finished up some work at the Owens Bakersfield studio on July 17, 1974. He left the studio on his motorcycle en route to Central California near San Simeon to meet up with his family for a fishing trip. He left the studio and headed north on Coastal Highway 1. Sometime around 10 p.m., for reasons unknown, Don's motorcycle hit the raised center divider at Yerba Vista Street on northbound Pacific Highway 1 in Morro Bay. He was thrown from the bike and sustained severe injuries. The ambulance arrived shortly thereafter and transported him to the hospital. Don Rich was pronounced dead on arrival at the Sierra Vista Hospital in San Luis Obispo, California. The police reported that there were no skid marks on the road and no apparent mechanical problems with the motorcycle. Don Rich was only 32 years old. Buck Owens was devastated by the loss of Don Rich. He had pleaded with Don not to ride his motorcycle that day and had previously begged Don to quit riding his bike because it was so dangerous. He refused to talk about Don for years. Finally, in an interview in the late 90s, Buck said, "He was like a brother, a son, and a best friend. Something I never said before, maybe I couldn't, but I think my music life ended when he died. Oh yeah, I carried on and I existed, but the real joy and love and real lightning and thunder is gone forever." Don Rich was loved by many and his music was loved by millions. In all my research about this episode, I did not find one bitter or negative word found about this man. He had no enemies. That is a rarity in this world. He was known for being the guy who was always smiling, always laughing, always kind. Don's kindness was apparent in a story I read one night when his telephone rang in the middle of the night. When he answered the phone, it was someone whose battery was dead and he needed a jump. He said he'd be there in a minute. Then, before he hung up the phone, he said, "By the way, who is this?" That was Don Rich. Don was survived by his wife, Marlene, sons Vic and Vance, and his mother, Ann Ulrich. His father, Bill, preceded him in death just 7 months prior to his passing. He was buried in Hillcrest Memorial Park in Bakersfield, California. Although Don Rich has been gone for more than 50 years, he is remembered as Buck Owens' sidekick, his guitarist and harmony singer. He is also distinctly remembered for the one that helped give Buck Owens his distinct sound. Has there ever been a sideman more well-known or recognized? I can't think of any. Don Rich had so much talent and charisma. There was no one quite like him. There are lots of video clips of Don, both with Buck and without. Go look him up. Don Rich's legacy as Buck Owens' trusted sidekick and a pioneering figure in the Bakersfield Sound remains deeply ingrained in country music history. Though his life was tragically cut short, His innovative guitar work, his rich harmony vocals, and unyielding dedication continue to inspire generations of musicians and fans alike. Don wasn't just a bandmate. He was the heart and soul behind a sound that changed the face of country music forever. His influence echoes on, reminding all of us of the power of true artistry and friendship. Thank you all for listening to this episode of Classic Country Backstories. Please make sure to like and subscribe. And until next time, God bless, take care, and I'll see you later.